Modern science is an amazing thing. If we look at our hands, for example, we just see a pair of hands. But if we put our hands under a microscope, we see all kinds of living things and things happening, a whole ecosystem of activity on our hands, just with the aid of a microscope, for example. When we look at a Torah scroll, we can see the same type of history just lying there, but without that technology, we are never able to see it, but now we can. Nehemiah Gordon and Keith Johnson, welcome back to Shabbat Night Live. We are going to unleash some modern technology on an ancient scroll.
Amen. Well, in the last couple programs, we talked about this Torah scroll, how it has an incredible history coming from the dark areas of Yemen up to the land of Israel in this miraculous operation, Magic Carpet, and ends up in Keith's hands. He brings it to the U.S., and a few days ago, we in the chronological timeline of the real world, we open it up. And we look at it and we see all kinds of interesting things. We saw the hole in a previous episode.
Can I do one thing?
Yeah.
This is because our wives are here. I want to show a couple pictures of them helping Nehemiah doing this. I mean, it was phenomenal. And my wife's probably going to get mad at me. She doesn't like to be on, but she's so, I called her today in the break and I said, honey, thank you so much. Nutso husband says he's got to go and get a Torah scroll. Nutso husband says, I'm going to write a book about the name. I mean, on and on and on. And she's been so faithful. But that's one.
So here it is. We can see.
Okay. We're looking at 23.
Yeah, so we're looking here at Leviticus 23. The section actually that I opened up in 2002 on Shavuot, or around the time of Shavuot and read, and I'm actually pointing to it there. Next to me is my wife and Keith's wife and Keith.
And there's another picture I want you to show.
And here what we're doing is we're looking at a detail. And one of the things I discovered is on your iPhone, you can actually get incredible resolution photographs. Not as good as the microscope, but you could actually see details that you definitely can't see with the naked eye, especially if you have the right lighting. So there we are looking at a certain detail with very powerful lighting.
One more.
And you know, so my wife isn't just leaning over to look; she's actually holding the light in the exact spot I need it. And Andrea, Keith's wife, is holding it in the exact spot where I can get an image there. And here, what I'm doing is I'm photographing the scroll using a camera that costs, the whole camera setup is about $5,000. 45 megapixel camera. It was cutting edge when it was released. Now they've gone up to 65 megapixels. But when this released, this was the highest resolution that you can get for a commercial camera. And what we're doing there is my wife and Keith's wife, they're not just looking at what I'm doing, you know, befuddled. They're actually looking at little bubbles. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little level that's attached to the camera. And what they need to do is tell me, is the camera perfectly level on two different axes? Because if it's not, then things in the corner will be wider and things in the other corner will be narrower, right? You want it to be uniform throughout the image. And so they're actually, you know, directing me, because I can't see it. It's on the other side of the camera. In some situations, we were able to use a tripod with a special arm that extends, and therefore you don't have to constantly have them check the level. You just do it once. But we didn't have the tripod in this situation. And so what we actually did is we went through all of Keith's Torah scroll and we photographed the entire thing.
Listen, I'm telling you. And so we're talking, I don't know how long it took. It took a really long time. Some of them were 6. Was it between 3 and 6?
Well, this is the interesting thing. So the tradition is that a Torah scroll, each sheet is supposed to have between 3 and 8 columns. 8 is the maximum, 3 is the minimum. The first column of this Torah scroll, which has Genesis 1:1 and on, is a single column. I mean, it's a sheet that only has one column in it. And why is that? Well, we don't know for sure, but my guess would be is someone made a mistake in that first column, and rather than correct the mistake using some of the means we're going to see right now, scratching things out, he just removed the entire column. If I had to guess, he made a mistake with God's name, or with, in that case, Elohim, which is one of God's titles, and he probably cut out that sheet and replaced it with another sheet that was 1 column wide. But you're really not supposed to have a column that's only one, or a sheet that's only 1 column wide. It's supposed to be between 3 and 8. Well, that's kind of a problem when you're trying to take photographs, and I'm trying to balance this camera in my hand for over an hour, and some of them are 3, so that's not as high, and some of them are 8, which is, if it's 8, wow, I've got to like really stretch to be able to get to it. And I've traveled all around the world and photographed using this technique. I don't always have people to help me balance, and so it doesn't always come out as nicely.
Yes.
Sometimes it comes out better when you have a tripod, but this is actually extremely important because there are things that I cannot see sitting here right now that I can see in the 4 to 5 megapixel camera. There are details I can see that I can't really see. I want to look at this word here that we can see from the overhead camera. This is a live image that you're recording. It's pretty cool. And you can see this word is discolored as compared to all the other words around it. Or actually the parchment that it's written on is discolored. And why is it discolored? So here they had a mistake. It was an error. I don't know what the error was because they erased it. And how did they erase it? They took a sharp instrument and they scratched it off the surface, and that is what caused the discoloration. And they wrote the correction over the erasure. And the word we have here is the word hachaya, the living. It says v'chol hachaya lemina, and all the living animals according to its kind. It's about the flood. And so in addition to the discoloration, you see that chet there is a very strange chet. And this is a chet that starts out that when they would write the letter chet, there'd be a little bump on it, and that was called the camel's hump. And over time, the camel's hump grew bigger and bigger and bigger until here where it's almost ridiculous, the camel's hump, this little thing up here. It's almost like a little upside down V on top of the chet. That makes, meaning normally it's flat and there's a little tiny protrusion on the top. And here it's become this whole different thing, a whole big, it's the camel's hump. And the way they've written it is there's 2 Zions, the letter Zion, and they're connected by a camel's hump. That's how they've written the chet. So it's kind of become ornate, I would call it, kind of stylized. It's not how the chet was originally written even 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, but this is how it develops in Yemen in the late 19th, early 20th century. Now, I want to do something, and I think we have time to do this. I want to show you under the microscope what this erasure looks like.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I have this device. It's called a dynolite. Dynolites are usually used for industrial applications. And what do I mean by that? Let's say you have a company that sells bed sheets, and you tell people it's a 600 count bed sheet, and you get your shipment of bed sheets from China. Well, how do you know if it really has 600 thread? So you need a microscope to do that. And this device, this dynolite, allows you to look at a very at a microscopic resolution, at a microscopic image, and determine things like, okay, does this have the 600 count, and various other things. There are dozens of different models of dynolite, and they're used for different industrial applications. And a scholar in Germany, a scientist actually in Germany, brilliant scientist in Berlin, discovered that this dynolite that was designed for industrial applications, it wasn't designed for Torah scrolls, can be used to study manuscripts of various kinds because it has 3 different types of light. It has a 50x magnification when it's on this what's called a light stand, and the types of light it has are visible, which is just normal light. It also has, by the way, this is, look at this. This is what this isn't the Torah scroll. This is the sheet that we put the Torah scroll on. This is what it looks like under 50x light. And then we can also do, this is the infrared, the ultraviolet, and this is the infrared. So she discovered that you could use this on manuscripts, not just Hebrew manuscripts. She studies all kinds of manuscripts. And when you put it on the manuscript, you can see details that you can't see with the naked eye. And that is really cool. You could also document it. What do I mean by document it? I click a little button here and I take a photo.
Ah, okay.
So we're going to look at the erasure that we saw before, and we're going to look at it under the microscope. And what you can see with the visible light at 50x is you see here the edges of the erasure. So this here is the original parchment, and this fuzzy part here, the fuzzy part here is where they scratch the ink off the parchment. And it leaves this like kind of hairy mess. And you'll actually see in a lot of manuscripts, Torah scrolls and codexes as well, you'll see when they try to make a correction, they have a problem because they're writing over this hairy mess. Now, in this case, it wasn't such a big deal that they were able to do it. Another thing we can do with this device is we turn off the light stand, and now we go over to ultraviolet. And there are details you can see in ultraviolet, not in this case, but there's often details you can see in ultraviolet that you can't see. Sometimes you can see erased words in ultraviolet that you don't see in the visible light. Not in this case, but often sometimes it's the case. And the other thing you can see is you can determine the type of ink. So there are two main types of ink. There's iron gall ink and carbon ink. And carbon ink maintains its opacity, meaning when I go from the visible light to with the light on, of course, when I go to the visible light to the infrared light, it is just as dark as if I'm in visible light. Whereas here it kind of ghosts out, right? So it's beginning to ghost out here, and that tells me that this is iron gall ink. Now this is really important because there are discussions in rabbinical literature about writing Torah scrolls. And there's a debate about whether you're allowed to use iron gall ink in early rabbinical literature. And the assumption of many scholars for some time was, well, all Torah scrolls must have been written in carbon ink, because in the Talmud is a debate about whether you're actually allowed to use iron gall ink. And it turns out most Torah scrolls, the ones I've seen at least, are actually written in iron gall ink, not carbon ink. And you can see that using this device. Sometimes you'll see that people wrote the letters of the Torah scroll or codex in iron gall ink, and then a corrector came along and made a correction, and the corrector used the other type of ink, the carbon ink. So you can actually see layers. In the Leningrad Codex, for example, I was able to see two different layers of ink. There was the layer of the original scribe, and there was the layer of the re-inker. The re-inker is the one who went over it when the ink flaked off, and he traced over the letters, and he used carbon ink instead of iron gall ink. So you see all kinds of really interesting things that you can't see with the naked eye. Now there's a bunch of interesting things in this scroll, and maybe even without rolling it, I'm going to show you some of these, okay? Yeah. We're going to use the microscope here, invisible light. I'm going to turn it on the light here. And you see this little dot here? So at first you might think that dot is, there's a freckle on the animal, right? But no, this dot is put here on purpose. And this is what's called a dry dot. What's a dry dot? You take the pen that you're using, usually in Yemen and in the earliest times and everywhere, the pens they weren't quills. That's a misconception. Quills were introduced in Europe, and Jews adopt them around the 13th and 14th century. In most of the Jewish world before that, or in the entire Jewish world before that, they used a reed. A reed it comes from the brook. You take out a reed from a swamp or something like that, or a brook, and you take a reed. There were certain types of reeds they used, and they would use that as a pen. That was their pen. And so in this case, what he does is he takes his pen and he makes a dry dot. And why a dry dot? Because there's a rabbinical law that you're not allowed to put any symbols in the Torah scroll other than the letters. So you're not allowed to put any vowels. So you're allowed to put the letters, and you're allowed to put certain other things, like these are called crowns. So you can put the crowns on the letters. But you can't add any dots, specifically vowels, because the vowels are a series of dots and sometimes dashes as well. And so in this scroll, they have all these dots, but they're dots without ink. Here's another one. They're all over this scroll, these dots.
So they just took the reed and popped it on there.
They took a reed that had no ink on it and they pushed it in. Right. And so for here, for example, let's see. I'm going to try to
explain the perfect round.
Look at that.
Right. Look at that. That's a triple dot. The triple dot was used in this scroll at the beginning of sections. Now, why was it used at the beginning of sections? I don't entirely know, but the scribe decided to do that. And these dots are especially very common in Yemenite scrolls. So here's another one. We have the beginning of a section. Hold on, let me see if I can find it. So here's the problem with working with, so there he doesn't actually have the dots. It's a bit hard to see here. But often at the beginning of a section, we'll have the triple dot. And then throughout the text, he has these dots. And what are these dots? Let me show you on my computer, because I took, and it's incredible. These photos I'm about to show you on my computer, I took with an iPhone. That's right. This isn't some special equipment. It's a iPhone 12, and I can see things I can't even see with the naked eye. Now, If I was younger, I might be able to see them with the naked eye. And if I had the right lighting. But here, let's go to this here. So this is what we were looking at before. This is the correction of the word hachaya in Genesis. And then here you have a dot. Here you have a dot. Here you have a dot. You have all these different dots. I'm going to zoom in on these so people can see them. So what are the different dots? And the different dots in this scroll have different meanings. And this is what shocked me, because I've never seen this before. I've looked at a lot of scrolls. I've looked at a lot of Yemenite scrolls. I've looked at Yemenite scrolls that are a lot older than this one. I've looked at Yemenite scrolls from the 15th century at the British Library that have actually an incredible story to them. Can I share the story of the British Library?
Go ahead.
It's incredible. So there was this man in the 19th century, meaning the 1800s, who was a Jew who, while he was immigrating, he was on his way to move to Israel. And on his way to Israel, he became a Christian and moved to Israel, even though he was a Christian. And he was very much unliked in the Jewish community because he had converted to Christianity. And they gave him a really hard time. Well, he lived in the Christian quarter of the old city, and he started a business. And the business was, he was an antiquities dealer. His name was Moses Shapiro. And Moses Shapiro is pretty well known today in certain circles, not for what I'm about to tell you about, but for something else. So what he's best known for is he found these scrolls that he sold for £1 million to the British Museum. And they were later proclaimed to be a forgery. And what was the reason they said they were forgeries? And it's interesting because the #1 critic he had was a man named C.D. Ginsburg, or Christian David Ginsburg. David Ginsburg was also a Jewish convert to Christianity, but he also happened to be the top scholar of the 19th century of the Masoretic text. And David Ginsburg studied the scrolls that Moses Shapiro found in Israel next to the Dead Sea, or he didn't find them himself, right? Somebody brought them to him, the story is, and then he, as the antiquities dealer, brought them to the British Library. They had found these scrolls next to the Dead Sea, and Ginsburg looks at these and he says, no, these are fake. These aren't real. And how do we know they're not real? Well, first of all, nothing can survive in Israel next to the Dead Sea for thousands of years. It's not possible. Meaning rocks can survive, but not parchment, not leather, because they can survive in Egypt. We have lots of papyri in Egypt that are far older, and leather, far older than that. But they said this couldn't happen in Israel. It's too wet, even next to the Dead Sea. Somebody say, uh-oh. Uh-oh. And why do I say uh-oh? This is in the late 1800s. Well, in 1947, famously, a Bedouin shepherd found scrolls next to the Dead Sea. And then a few years later, somebody said, oh, we said Shapiro's scrolls were fake because nothing can survive. No leather can survive next to the Dead Sea. By the way, they found next to the Dead Sea a reed mat that they claim is from the Chalcolithic period, meaning it's something like over 4,000 years old, if you accept their chronology. It's a lot older than the Dead Sea Scrolls. So things do survive. But in Shapiro's time, they didn't know that. So Shapiro is discredited as a forger, as a fake, and they destroy his life over these scrolls that they claimed were fake. And now the question is, where are the scrolls? Where are Shapiro's scrolls? They might be real. Maybe they are fake. But now we can do carbon-14 testing that didn't exist at the time of Shapiro. We can find objectively, maybe it's not all that accurate. Maybe it's off by a few hundred years. But we'll know, is it from the 19th century or is it from the 2nd century, BC, right? You can find that out more or less. Nobody knows where the scrolls are. Shapiro's scrolls are missing. It is what it is. People have been looking for them now for decades, hoping to find them, but they went missing. So Shapiro had another situation. He went to Yemen, and in Yemen, he asked the Jews, I want to buy your scrolls. People will be interested in these scrolls. And they said, no, these are our sacred objects. We can't give you our scrolls. And the story that the Jews of Yemen told is that he then went to the government of Yemen, the Muslim government, bribed people in the government and said, go seize those scrolls for me, I'll give you a lot of money. Okay, I don't know if that's true or not. That was the accusation that was made against Shapiro. He then goes back home to Israel after he sells the scrolls to the British Library. And there are Jews from Yemen who had moved to Israel in the 1860s, and they see him on the streets of Jerusalem. And they say, that's the guy who stole our scrolls. And they go to the police. and the police could care less, right? It didn't happen in Israel, it happened in Yemen, right? Now that was all part of the Ottoman Empire, but they still didn't care, especially because it involved corrupt Turkish officials, right? But in any event, I've examined the scrolls that Shapira brought, the real scrolls, not the fake ones, right? That were 500 years old that were brought from Yemen. And those scrolls are far older than this, and I didn't see these features in the scroll. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at a lot of other scrolls that I didn't see this from Yemen. I haven't seen this. So this is very interesting. Now, it's not, I'm told by someone who's an expert in Yemenite scrolls, it's not unique, but it is very unusual.
Hang on one second.
Are we out of time?
Yeah. We're out of time, but we're going to come back. So
okay.
One second. So we're going to come back with why this is so unique in this scroll.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear the answer. I'm sure you can't either. So we want to thank you for making this show even possible, because without your support, this wouldn't happen. Thank you for bringing Keith here. Thank you for bringing Nehemiah here. We're going to give you an opportunity to give again. Why? Because we'd like this to go to other folks. Wouldn't you like for other people to see this? And you can do that with your donation. So we thank you in advance. We'll give you a couple minutes to do that. We'll be right back.